So, shalom, marhaba, good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, depending on where you're following this meeting from. I'm happy to see that we have participants joining in from all over the world, as we always do. To all of you, a sincere welcome to this Digital Health in Motion brought to you by Bayer Israel, live from Tel Aviv. My name is Hugo. I'm the Managing Director for Bayer in Israel and will be the facilitator for this meeting. And you know, this is actually the 5th live event we are doing from Tel Aviv, and so far, more than 100,000 people have joined us in these online sessions. Maybe and hopefully some of you joined us in the past and is now returning for another great experience. As always, we encourage all of you to be active in the chat. Tell all of the listeners where you're joining from, post comments and questions, and we will try to address as many as possible during the event. And what an event we have for you today. Great topics brought to you by amazing speakers. Dr. Cecilia Caetano, Head of Medical Affairs Menopause at Bayer, Professor Moshe, the President at Gynica, Gila Tolub, partner at McKinsey Company here in Israel, and then two very exciting Israeli innovative companies represented by Alon Ironi, CEO and founder of Theranica, and Dr. Ziv Pereman from X-trodes. With that, and without further ado, I'm happy to introduce our first speaker, Cecilia Caetano, Head of Medical Affairs Menopause at Bayer. Cecilia, please, the word is yours.
Thank you, Hugo, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening. It is a true pleasure to be part of this session where I will focus more on menopause, as it is an area which has not been so much in scope for digital compared with other areas in women's health. So as Hugo mentioned, I'm heading the medical affairs team in menopause at Bayer. We are working full of passion and super committed to bring more science and give menopausal women a louder voice, because we truly believe that menopause is entering a new era where industry, academia, and Fem-Tech and digital companies play a very important role. So then let's us get started and talk menopause. So menopause is part of women's lives, and it marks the end of menstrual cycles and the end of reproductive years. So for most women, it will come as a natural part of getting older, and for others, it may be the result of surgical or even medical treatment. A woman is said to be in menopause when a full year had passed since her last menstrual period, which happens around the age of 51. And the menopause transition starts some years before menopause is established, when women start to experience symptoms related to hormonal changes, as ovaries will produce less and less estrogen, then periods become irregular and sometimes heavy, and symptoms like hot flashes, sleep disturbances, mood changes are also very common in this phase, which is known as perimenopause. And of course, being part of women's life also means that menopause will come sooner or later to half of the world population. And indeed, it is estimated that by 2030, the population of women experiencing menopause will increase to 1.2 billion worldwide, with 47 million new entrants each year. So it's really a very important phase and a very important topic. However, although menopause is a life stage and not a disease, it can have a broad impact in women's health and affect multiple organs and systems, as you can see here. So vasomotor symptoms or hot flashes, as usually mentioned, are typically symptoms associated with menopause and the symptoms that we always think about when thinking about menopause. They are episodes of profuse heat, mainly in the upper side of the body, with flushing and sometimes sweating. Although I do remember a patient who had hot flashes in her feet and had to get rid of her shoes wherever she was. So it's quite variable. However, there are other symptoms. Menopause is more than hot flashes. Symptoms like sleep disturbances, mood changes, anxiety, decreased libido, joint pain, vaginal dryness are common complaints of menopausal women. And although the underlying mechanism is exactly the same for all women, the way each woman experiences menopause is quite variable, and it can go through the full spectrum of not having symptoms at all, or having very severe and debilitating symptoms, sometimes lasting for more than 10 years after the last menstrual period. So it can be quite chronic and debilitating. So then, sorry. Yeah, so then pausing now for a bit to tell you a real life story. So this story happened before I joined Bayer, when I worked in the hospital. And you can see here the exact place pointed by this red arrow, which is the gynecology outpatient clinic in the 9th floor of the Coimbra University Hospital in Portugal, where I'm from, where I was responsible for a consultation in menopause. So one day I saw a woman who came to the consultation, and she was looking absolutely exhausted. She was actually quite desperate, I have to tell you, since she had not been able to sleep for quite a while, some weeks, and she would wake up every single night, more than once. And the reason? Hot flashes, menopause. So she came to me and said, well, doctor, I'm getting crazy with not being able to sleep. I know that menopause is normal, but this really feels too much for me. I cannot function. I almost fell asleep while driving. It's like having a newborn again. I cannot manage. Is this really normal? I ask you. So, like this example, many, many more women exist. And I collected here some quotes that I heard from my patients, that we heard from women that we interviewed as part of Bayer activities, and the answers are quite similar. And you see that when it comes to women's health, and not only menopause, it goes through all different aspects in women's health, that so often the focus is on coping, on accepting, on managing, on suffering in silence, not bothering doctors, not bothering others, organizing life around periods, organizing life around menopausal symptoms. All is normal. Women can manage everything. For sure, they can manage everything. But is this really part of being a woman? Is this really normal? And the answer is no. So normal stops when quality of life is affected. It is not normal to have to organize life around periods. It is not normal to have to change daily routines because of menopause. And no, it is not normal to have to wake up every night because of hot flashes. No, this is not part of being a woman. This is not normal. And with increased longevity, women nowadays spend a big proportion of their lives in menopause. So what's the relevance of living longer if you don't live with quality? Women are quite active in their families, in their jobs, in society. So maintaining good quality of life is extremely important. Some women are not impacted by menopause at all, as I mentioned, but for others, menopause can really be very bothersome and have a dramatic effect in their health, in their quality of life, in their consumption of healthcare, in work productivity. So symptoms can be long-lasting, debilitating, and can really have a broad impact in their lives, including in the workplace, with increased absenteeism and loss of productivity. However, despite the high impact of these symptoms, most women remain in silence. Women feel somehow uncomfortable or unprepared to talk about these symptoms, to open up with their healthcare providers, because contrary of all the preparation for the first period and the talk that we all give, that we all receive before having our first period, no one is really preparing women for menopause. And they often feel quite insecure to talk about all these symptoms and all that is happening. And even more additionally, menopause has also not been consistently integrated into the curricula of residency programs. So several doctors are also not at ease to talk about menopause. They don't feel prepared themselves to talk about menopause, and this will add to the silence as well. And as a result, the vast majority of menopausal women which have symptoms which are impacting their lives is not receiving treatment. So focus is on coping, establishing a culture of silence. But we as Bayer, we want to change these, and we want to change these by providing education, by increasing awareness around menopausal symptoms, so women feel empowered to speak to their healthcare providers, to their friends, to their family, to get the support that they need. And here, I think Fem-Tech and digital tools are very, very powerful, since they allow educational content to be tailored to women's needs and to be delivered in the right time, in the right format, so that they can really be useful and meaningful for women. We at Bayer, we had excellent collaborations with Fem-Tech partners, for example, like Flow and Clue. And we had activities looking in education around contraception and heavy menstrual bleeding, for example. And of course, we are now looking forward to also establish new collaborations in the field of menopause, which, as I mentioned, is not so much in focus for the time being. But the power of Fem-Tech and digital tools is even broader than only awareness and education. It is really the power of transforming perceptions into reality, helping to translate the "this is only in my head" into tracking specific symptoms, providing specific data, making it much easier for women to talk to their healthcare providers, and also to collect data, opening new perspectives for innovative endpoints for clinical trials, for example, to advance research and advance women's health in the end. And the potential for menopause is huge because there is a high number of women in need who often see their symptoms dismissed or even underestimated by healthcare providers. So as a global leader in women's health with a strong R&D expertise, we are also broadening our menopause portfolio, and we will continue to focus on providing science, innovative solutions, and education to meet individual women's needs. And with more science and less silence, we are committed to support women through all the stages of their lives, standing true to our vision of health for all, hunger for none. So I would now call to all you out there, all women's healthcare advocates, to join us and make this a reality together. Thank you.
Cecilia, thank you so much, and always a great pleasure to hear your inspiring talk. So I believe we have time for one question. I just want to share with you also initially, I've been watching the chat online and can inform you that you have listeners now from all over the world at the same time. So, you know, especially happy to welcome people from the Ukraine in our call today, but you also have listeners from Brazil, India, and France, and all over the place. So great to see. And thank you guys for all the reactions in the chat. A question for you. So menopause, obviously, and most certainly is not something new, and it's impacting so many women. So I have a direct question. So why on earth haven't we been able to address this topic in a better way before?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, you know, indeed, attitudes towards menopause are now shifting dramatically after a period of silence, which was also, I think, related to taboos and lack of information around menopause. We see, and from my opinion, family planning allowed women to plan their families, to invest in their education, to empower them to live their lives to the fullest. And I think now we are coming to this stage that menopause will not get in the way of these empowered women. And we see that in women's health. If you look into other conditions, there is more and more information and activities around multiple conditions. And I think now the time for menopause has come. We see that more and more women are willing to advocate for themselves, to advocate for other women. More and more celebrities are also openly sharing their stories around how they are impacted by menopausal symptoms, how they deal with that. And with that, they are inspiring millions of women to do the same. So I think that now, and especially in some countries like the UK, menopause is really a very relevant topic. And I think it's all about that, bringing it into the spotlight, talking about menopause, importance of menopause in the workplace, and just normalizing the discussion like it happened already in some other women's health topics. I think this will be next.
Fantastic. So not only a great speaker, but also a great ambassador and advocacy for this important topic. Thank you so much for your participation, Cecilia. So moving on to our next speaker, and Professor Moshe, I won't read the full executive summary of our next speaker because it would be too little time left for him to speak. But just to mention a few past and current achievements, Professor Hod is the past president of the European Association of Perinatal Medicine, the author of more than 300 publications, advisor to several startup companies, chief consultant to Clalit, the largest sixth one here in Israel, chairman of FIGO, and president of Gynica Healthcare, among many, many other impressive achievements. So please, Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hugo. Thank you, Cecilia, and thank you, the Bayer team. It's a great pleasure to be here at this Bayer webinar, and I'll take you to a bit further into the life cycle approach, because that's actually what I was doing in the last 11 years for FIGO when I chaired the Committee on Pregnancy and Prevention of Non-Communicable Disease. And I try to connect it, what Cecilia just now described, but I try to connect it throughout the life cycle, pregnancy, non-communicable disease, and even take you to medical cannabinoids. That's the future. And I truly believe that. I think that Cecilia thinks that we are almost there. Let's define first what's Fem-Tech. And women were actually lag behind for many years in many clinical trials. And have a look that even in 1977, the US FDA excluded women of childbearing age from taking part in drug trials. Unfortunately, they are menstruating, they can take a drug while being pregnant, so they were excluded from clinical trials. And it all changed in 2016 when Ida Ting was credited for coining the term Fem-Tech, which means technology designed for women's health. Technology, software, diagnostics, product, services, and the products can be fertility solutions, period tracking applications, pregnancy and nursing care, sexual wellness, and mainly reproductive system healthcare. That's what I am interested in. Let's come to these days. We have the COVID pandemic that started in 2020, but I am involved in another pandemic, and I think that's much more devastating and much more serious. The NCD pandemic, the non-communicable disease pandemic, and it started for me 11 years ago, and I'll show you in the next slide why it started then. But what are NCDs? Very briefly, NCDs are chronic diseases, non-communicable diseases. They can be genetic and epigenetic, and you know most of them: diabetes, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, obesity, and many others. Usually diseases that will start in the second part of your life, and then it will connect, of course, to menopause. And I'll show you. For me, it started in 2011 when I was invited with the FIGO group to the United Nations in New York. They organized there a meeting with the WHO, UN and the WHO and FIGO, and the UN, it was called UN meeting on NCDs. And the same year, September 2011, the Director General of WHO at that time, Dr. Margaret Chan, she came out with a special editorial in the New England Journal of Medicine describing the burden that we are facing, a slow motion disaster. And it's actually happening 11 years later. The disaster is here. And have a look on the numbers. NCD kills 41 million people each year. 74% of all deaths globally. Each year, 70 million die from NCD before the age of 70, and you'll see some other disasters shown in the next few sentences. But I want to move on. Have a look on the numbers, the dollars spent, and that it comes from the World Economic Forum and the Harvard University. The cost of the world economy will be 47 trillion. I repeat it, 47 trillion over the next 20 years, representing 75% of the global GDP. And have a look at the bottom, what it will cost in order to prevent and treat in the low and middle income countries, 11.4 billion per year. So think about it. Buyer, pay attention. It's there. This one is taken from the FIGO site, and I was very proud to be the chairman of the FIGO Committee on Pregnancy and Non-Communicable Disease, and we produced a huge amount of publications, a huge amount of guidelines how to treat and manage pregnancy and its complications, with the main topic in our head. We affirm the phrase that maternal health is a nation's wealth, with pregnancy as the small window of opportunity to interrupt the vicious cycle of future NCDs. And it was all summarized here in this special editorial published in the International Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology. I called it Connecting Maternal Fetal Medicine to Non-Communicable Disease Prevention. And it actually summarizes all our work And the take-home message is clear. Pregnancy is the window of opportunity to prevent future NCD. And here is the vicious cycle. It's here. It's a one-slide lecture. I usually always use this Botero metabolic family. I love them. The Colombian artist Botero. And you can see here the parents, the offspring, the maid, 3 generations, because already the germ cells of the offspring, the outside of this girl here and the sperm of this boy here, they are already imprinted and programmed. So we affect here 3 generations. And if we want to interrupt this vicious cycle, we can manage this through preconceptional management, through the first trimester, prediction and prevention of pregnancy complications, because during the second and third trimester, the complication is already here and we can't do anything. Programming and imprinting an abnormal uterine environment is already there. Then we go to the delivery. But then the third and probably most important entry point for intervention is postpartum. Because have a look what happens to the offspring. It will go throughout the life cycle with neonatal insulin resistance, childhood obesity, early metabolic syndrome, PCOS, adulthood obesity. And if it's a female offspring, she'll have a menopause somewhere here. If it's a boy, fortunately, we don't have menopause. But have a look what happens to the mother. The mother will go directly in later life to an NCD. The mother will also have a menopause here sometime during the late 40s, 50s. But if the mother will also have an NCD, her condition will be much, much more destructive. So yes, we can interrupt and we can do something about it. Have a look on the global perinatal market. Not many people know it. I know it because FIGO was so strong into it. We have 135 million live births per year. And have a look on the right side with low and middle income countries and the left side with high income countries. Have a look on the numbers. Southeast Asia, 55 million deliveries. India with 30 million only. Africa, 30 million. China, Brazil, Mexico. 95% of the global deliveries are on the right side, low and middle income countries, as well as all the complications. Every complication, most of the complications are here on the right side. We are spending most of our fortune. The big pharma, the big industry are on the left side, high income countries. Europe, 5 million deliveries. USA, 5 million deliveries. We produce guidelines that adapt new technologies, inventions, innovations, mainly to the left side. The only organization that can change it, can adapt, can connect and adapt the guidelines that are produced on the left side is FIGO. And as I said, I was very fortunate to lead the FIGO key opinion leaders in maternal fetal health and to produce guidelines that are serving now both sides. So that's really exciting. Let me now connect it very, very quickly to the cannabis, to the medical cannabis market. It's a publication coming from Forbes, published by Gilda Dincerti, and Gilda is the founder and the CEO of the PQE company in Italy, global company. And Gilda very clearly explains why can medical cannabis be Italy's next great opportunity. And I'm talking only about Italy, but it applies to everywhere. 20 billion market opportunity, and it's there. So yes, we are also going forward toward medical cannabis and Fem-Tech. And I would like to finish with this one. I borrowed this slide from my friend, Renita Das from Frost & Sullivan. Great lecture in July. That's the part of Frost & Sullivan, the life cycle, reproduction, menopause, senior care, and those are the impacts on cost of care. And I already mentioned it, pregnancy, low and middle income countries, menopause. Cecilia brilliantly showed what we have here, hybrid management, and that's my addition. The NCDs. NCDs have to be taken into account. And I'm going to finish in a second. NCDs are here, and NCDs with pregnancy and prediction of new technologies, connecting it, of course, to menopause to pregnancy in LMIC and to medical cannabis market, this is the biggest growth opportunity for the next few years. I'll finish here. We are moving towards a new approach to telehealth and pregnancy management. We don't have enough time to deal with it, but it's in the market. And we are constructing now a new Fem-Tech hub, Israel, India, and Kenya, because here in Israel, and I know that part of my answer to Hugo, in Israel, we have the innovations, the inventions, and we are going to join forces with our friends in India and Kenya and to push forward all these startups and all these opportunities, as well as cannabinoids and women's health. And we are going to push via Gynica, endometriosis, dysmenorrhea, and dyspareunia towards clinical trials. Please join us in Saloniki, May 2023. You will get it all there. So please join us there. Thank you very much.
Professor, thank you so much for your presentation. And I know it's extremely difficult to compile all this knowledge into a very few minutes online, but you did a tremendous job. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, not room for any questions at this point in time, but I think you addressed the most critical question I had about innovation. So thank you for a great speech, and we will move directly on to our next speaker. So Gila Tolub is our next speaker. She's a partner at McKinsey Company and is based here in Israel, in Tel Aviv. She is a co-lead of McKinsey Health Tech Network, a community of more than 1,200 startups in the healthcare space. Areas of expertise includes transformation management as it relates to commercial, marketing, or cultural change needed for digital and analytics, such as customer centricity, user experience, or agile ways of working. And Gila, I had the pleasure of hearing you talk before. I can only say I really truly look forward to what you have to say. Please, the floor is yours.
I want to explore today the status of women's health data and see what we need to actually improve the care that we give to patients. The first thing that I want to say, by the way, is acknowledge that here in this presentation, I'm going to refer to women that are born biologically female. The focus of this presentation is this, but I recognize the need for future research into health issues that are inclusive of trans, non-binary, and gender fluid communities. So before we talk about the data gap in the care delivery, I think we need to define what we mean by women's health. And women's health is much more than just reproduction. When we consider women's health, we incorporate female-specific conditions or general health conditions that affect women differently, such as cardiovascular conditions, or that affect women disproportionately, like autoimmune diseases or migraine, that we'll talk a little bit about with Theranica. So the first question is, how are these conditions measured? The first step in tracking women's health condition is simply to track data disaggregated by gender. And what we find is that there's already a gap here. Many countries are not publishing sex disaggregated data, which unfortunately correlates with the income level of the country. So here I've taken the example of COVID, given its timeliness, and you could see that 75% of COVID cases in high-income countries are reported, disaggregated by sex, but that drops to 40% in low-income countries. And why does it matter? It matters because this data helps us understand outcomes based on sex and to translate those insights to action in how we can treat both men and women. For example, when we have sex disaggregated data, it suggests that men may be at a higher risk of severe disease progression when it comes to COVID-19. So from this high-level exploration, we wanted to zero in on a more granular example of what we're seeing in the US. So we took the definition of women's health and assessed the prevalence of the major conditions in each of those two buckets. So on top, you see general health conditions that impact women differently or disproportionately. And at the bottom in white, you could see largely female-specific conditions. And what we find is that roughly 50% of prevalence is in the female-specific category. But when we look at those same conditions based on disability-adjusted life years, those female-specific conditions shrink to represent only 15% of the total. For those of you who don't know, the point of DALYs is to measure the extent to which a condition impacts people. So not how prevalent the conditions are. So on the surface, this difference is not surprising, but it is surprising because menopause is not tracked at all in DALYs. Even though it meaningfully disrupts the lives of women, we heard from Cecilia. 80% of women that are going through menopause report experiencing symptoms that interfere with their lives. Today, it's estimated that $810 billion in productivity loss because of menopause. So we could see that we have a key metric here that's not capturing the full extent of the unmet need. It's not malicious or deliberate, would say Caroline Criado-Perez in her last book, Invisible Women. But if we want to bridge that gap, we need a new way of thinking. Because how do these data gaps really impact the way we treat and diagnose women's health conditions? When we look at the status quo, the lack of gender-aggregated data in research, in drug development, means that women are 7 times more likely to be misdiagnosed or discharged during a heart attack, or that it takes 4 additional years to get a diagnosis, or that it's 2 times more likely to experience adverse events from drugs. So we looked at the way physicians are coding the volume of diagnosis in claims data. We looked at 3 women's health conditions and 2 men's health conditions. What we found is that for women's health conditions in particular, there is a significant gap between the prevalence and the coding volume. On average, prevalence is 3 times higher than what was being coded. And this is double the disparity that we see for men's health conditions. So once again, we are seeing a data set and a set of behaviors that does not seem to acknowledge the true extent of the suffering associated with women's health conditions. Why is this? Carol in Paris would suggest that if the diagnoser, the caregiver, the innovator has not experienced the need themselves, it's difficult to get them to solve for it. So we dug deeper, and with that in mind, we looked at the composition of the physicians behind the coding volume that we have. And what we see is that the majority of the healthcare providers diagnosing menopause, PCOS, endometriosis are actually OBGYNs and primary care physicians. And what we see also is that the diagnosers tend to skew female as well. Let's look actually at this data a little bit deeper. Women represent 40% of primary care physicians, but they are 50% of the primary care physicians that diagnose menopause, PCOS, and endometriosis. So this suggested to us that if you are a woman going to your PCP to discuss symptoms that may be indicative of one of these conditions, you're more likely to be diagnosed if your OBGYN or PCP is female. This research seems to correlate with what Criado-Perez says in her book and what we see in multiple research. Women are more likely to survive a visit to the ER if their physician is female. Why does it matter? This finding is sobering in itself, but what are the knock-on effects? On top of this data and care gap, you could see that the clinical development pipeline, the research pipeline, are only 1 to 2% looking at women's health conditions. And this is perhaps unsurprising when we consider that in the context of the data that we have. It becomes very challenging to fuel innovation when the many sources of data at our disposal does not capture the full extent of the suffering. So what can we do about it? I want to propose 5 areas of opportunities to begin exploring. The first one is to reassess the way we measure the burden of women-specific conditions to ensure that we correctly capture the disruption and the suffering. For example, menopause is still characterized as an ill-defined time period. As little as 5 years ago, it was not known that there were multiple types of endometriosis. There's a lot of things we need to do. Number 2, we need to create new incentives, whether at the national, global, or academia level, or via public health institutes, to increase the volume of health data that is disaggregated by sex. Then we need to increase diversity and inclusion across the value chain. We need female representation among researchers, inventors, founders, to ensure more solutions are targeting women. Don't forget, don't be afraid, my male friends. Actually, research has shown that when inventors set out to solve health problems, male inventors are more likely to solve for male-oriented solutions, but women-led teams are going to solve for both. Number 4, accelerate programs to train physicians on care delivery biases, particularly for those who may not be able to relate to the conditions they're diagnosing. And lastly, build an integrated data lake to form a more robust perspective on the moments that matter along the customer journey. We can leverage real-world data to map the care journey for major women's health conditions and identify the moments that matter, where inefficiencies exist, and where it leads to disruptions and suffering. I spoke a lot, I said a lot of things. It's not going to be possible for you to remember everything you hear. So what I hope you take away is 4 things. 1, we have meaningful gaps in terms of what is and what isn't tracked in women's health. The variation we see across prevalence, DALYs, coding volume, for instance, paint an inconclusive picture of the true state of suffering. Better data is not only good for women, it's good for men, it's good for a stronger economy because women are taking often care of little ones and elderly. And there's an opportunity here to accelerate data and insight generation to unlock innovation, and all of you can play a part. So thank you for having me here today, and I look forward to continuing this conversation and how we can close the data gap together.
I think it's a fantastic presentation as always, and I don't think we have time for questions, unfortunately, but I will just have to say, I told you I got irritated and both sad and annoyed when I see the gender differences specifically in mortality data of women versus men. So thank you for raising this important topic. Thank you for advising on the path going forward. I hope there are people listening carefully to your message and that we can do something about this in the future. So thank you so much, Gila. We will move on to our next speaker, and our next speaker is the co-founder, the president, and the CEO of Theranica. And now from the webpage, a company that has set an ambitious goal to translate technological and business knowledge into mobile digital solutions to the field of pain therapeutics. Doing so by integrating the latest neuroscience with notable technological expertise. Now, Alon, this is quite an ambitious goal, and how do you translate this into a solution? Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hugo. Hi, everybody. I'm privileged to be here with you and talk about our technology. So let's talk about migraine. Let me get some control here over the screen. Can you flip to the next slide? Okay. So everybody heard about migraine, but people that do not suffer from migraine or do not have a family member or a close friend that suffers from migraine tend to think that migraine is just some sort of headache. And the truth is that migraine is not exactly this. It's a complicated disease that is still being researched and investigated. It's very prevalent. You would be surprised maybe to learn that it's more prevalent than diabetes, more prevalent than cardiovascular disorders. And it's definitely a female disease. 18% of women suffer from migraine versus 5-6% of men. So in the literature, you can see that at least 75% of migraine or people with migraine are women. I can tell you from our own experience that it's actually probably more. We have 86, 87% of our patients actually being women. It's not about headache. There's a collection of ugly symptoms related to migraine, including nausea, sensitivity to light, sound, touch, smell, and sometimes abdominal pain, and most of all, functional disability. In fact, migraine was found to be the second most common reason for missing work and school in the US and in the Western society. It's a debilitating disease. So you would expect, being so prevalent, that there would be a lot of solutions. Indeed, there are quite a lot of medications, therapies out there for migraine, but still, in spite of all that, repeating researchers have found that more than 50%, typically between 50 to 60% of people living with migraine are actually not satisfied with the care they're getting, either because their medication do not work for them or because they suffer from the side effects or the adverse events. Next slide. So specifically, if we look at the prevalence of migraine over the life cycle of women, we see that it starts actually with very young women. We have a lot of adolescent patients, unfortunately, from the age of 12, even below 12. But the peak of the years when women suffer from migraine is the productivity years, the 20s, the 30s, and the 40s. Then towards older ages, the disease tend to disappear gradually. But these are very important years where women are focused in building their families, in working on their careers, and this disease is debilitating them. Next. So this woman here that you see in the picture is very special to me. This is actually my daughter. And my daughter suffers from migraine since she was 14. She's 28 years old now. And when she was first diagnosed with migraine, she was prescribed with migraine medication. She tried several of them. And then she found herself having to make a choice. With every migraine attack that she had to make a choice. Either she doesn't take medication, and then of course she suffers from the symptoms, or she does take medications, which in many cases actually helped her, but then she suffers from the side effects. These side effects are mostly not dangerous, but she was telling us that she was drowsy, she was fatigued, she couldn't concentrate, she was deteriorating at school. This is a terrible choice to make. Either I suffer from the disease or I suffer from the medication. We in Theranica decided that we're not accepting this. We're not accepting this choice. We're not accepting the disability. Women deserve better solutions. Next. So our vision is to make a paradigm shift from about 100 years of migraine being treated with popping pills. Some of the pills are effective. Some of them are less effective. A lot of them have systemic side effects. Risk of abuse, drug-drug interaction, even addiction in the case of opioid. We're coming up, we have come up with a novel modern technology, remote electrical neuromodulation based on recent advances and discoveries. A solution that is drug-free, has a low rate of only local side effect, no systemic side effect, and very, very effective. Next slide, please. So, as I said, utilizing advancement in neuroscience to introduce this solution from the standpoint of patient using this solution, it's very easy to use. All they need to do upon the very onset of migraine symptoms, they place a device on their upper arm. It looks like an armband, basically, and then they hit their smartphone in a dedicated application. They start a treatment that goes on for 45 minutes. So place the device, click start, and then basically continue to do whatever you do. After 45 minutes, you take the device off and basically store it for the next migraine attack. Next. How does it work? And what is the difference between this device and the medication? So remote electrical neuromodulation is placed on the arm. It triggers actually an endogenous pain inhibition mechanism in the brain that's called conditioned pain modulation, CPM, which eventually selectively releases serotonin in increased quantities directly into the trigeminal cervical complex, which is exactly where the migraine pathway runs through. And that is exactly what inhibits the migraine pain and the other symptoms. This is how it works. Next. The device is indicated for all kinds of migraine. One interesting study that we have published a couple of years ago is on menstrual migraine. Menstrual migraine is not really a type of migraine. It is a very common manifestation of migraine, obviously with women, around the period days of every month. And it is considered, unfortunately, to be more difficult to treat because of the very strong manifestations of symptoms like pain and other, nausea and other symptoms. This is a study with 91 women participating. It was published, as I said, a year and a half ago. Most of them are in the mid-30s. You see the age on the left-hand side. And we found out that almost 75% of the women found this solution effective, either moderately or very effective or extremely effective. This is a very high ratio specifically for this phenotype of migraine, which, as I said, is considered more difficult to treat. Next. On top of the electrophysiological solution, which is the heart really of the solution, we added a whole platform of digital features. And the reason for that is because migraine is a chronic disease. Unfortunately, it lasts for decades for most men and women. And so what's important for people is to manage the disease. We built a whole system, whole digital system, starting with the device itself, communicating with the smartphone application, which communicates with the HIPAA-compliant server. Everything works together to provide patients not only with the therapy, but with education, with individual recommendations about how to improve their treatment, how to improve the therapy that they're using, and also all kinds of individual tips about their own specific migraine and how they can work on reducing the triggers for migraine. So this is a whole solution for treating migraine throughout the lifetime, really, of the patient. Next, please. That's it. I'm open for questions if there are any from the audience.
Thank you so much for a great presentation. And I can only say that, my wife lives with migraine, and I know what kind of a devastating impact this can have on your quality of life. So I applaud you and your company for bringing any solution to the market that can help in this matter. And also thank you so much for bringing in your daughter as a personal evidence into your story. That gave a really nice touch. So thank you so much. We will be moving on to our last speaker for tonight, and that is Dr. Pereman. He is the CEO of X-trodes, a company that strives to improve quality of life by allowing us to understand, predict, and improve our body's electrophysiological outcomes better than ever before. For those of us who really get curious when we hear about topics we know little about, I'm really looking forward to learning more. Dr. Pereman, please.
Thank you, Hugo. I'm glad to be here. Today, I'll talk about sleep, personalized sleep. Sleep disorders like insomnia, sleep apnea, and RBD have tremendous effect on our health and well-being. They are highly correlated with all kinds of major disorders like cancer, cardiovascular disease, depression, and cognitive decline. And it's not far away from us. I believe that each one of us either suffer from it or have a close family members that suffer, because 35% of the world population suffer from sleep disorders. 2.5 billion people suffer from this kind of problems that affecting their health and well-being. When we talk about sleep, there are many parameters that could influence our sleep. We can talk about the environment. We can talk about partner or partners. We can talk about the stage in life. And we can talk about also gender, because we know that gender has a real major effect on our sleep. In this important paper from 2018, we can see that sleep changes over time for women. And it's not a slight changes, it's a major changes in the level and the efficiency of sleep. And we can all guess the most important stage or the important changes are during pregnancy and menopause. In these changes, we see a huge differences. We now understand that women have 40% higher risk to develop sleep disorders that affecting their life and their activity. There are so many things that we can learn or change about our sleep, but we are limited with the current tools. Yes, there are several tools available. We're all familiar with watches, rings, mattresses, but they are pretty good for wellness sleep. You can drive clinical decision from these tools. You do have medical grade solutions to measure sleep at home, but they measure mainly snoring and breathing, and they are good for sleep apnea. It's a single sleep disorder. They don't measure the brain and other physiology aspect of your body. So you can't really understand the other additional 40 different sleep disorders that are available. So we stay with this solution, sleep study at clinic. It's also known as PSG. It's very accurate solution. However, there are several disadvantages, as you can see in this picture. We use rigid electrodes that we use with gel. We need to shape part of the body, many wires, and sometimes we need to sleep in someone else's bed and not in our natural environment. It's not only a problem for the patient, it's also a problem for the health system, because it required real estate, sleep clinic, overnight hospitalizations, long process of fitting this electrode. It's costly and it's inaccessible, because today, out of 15 patients that get referral for PSG, only one actually gets it. And we address this unmet need with our solution. We call it SmartSkin. It's a wearable device, medical grade, that measure our sleep on our own bed. As you can see in this picture, we have electrode. We call it electropads that attach to our skin and measure the physiology of our body. And it provides us exactly the same information that we get from PSG. Our system contains 3 components: the sensor, microelectronics that measure multimodality information, and AI-based analytic layer. This beautiful electrode that you can see here, actually dry electrode. They replace the current golden standard electrode. The flexible and soft, you don't need gel, it's dry electrode, and they have a perfect match to our skin. You can wear it for days, and it's with the same information like you have in PSG. We compare it head to head in the clinic. And our AI layer provide more information that increase the accuracy of the information and give us information that allows to shorten the clinical process. This deep technology was started 10 years ago at Professor Yael Hanin, our CTO and co-founder lab. We already have 4 patents and numerous publications available outside. We have a very supportive advisory board with world leader in the field of neuroscience and sleep medicine, and we have partners and clinical study in the leading institute all around the world. This is our solution, a full PSG at your own bed. There are so many sensors that we can measure, and we provide a modular solution that you can either measure a full PSG or subset based on your need. We use the real-world data in order to generate a paradigm shift of what you can do with sleep health. I will try to show you what are the new boundaries that we can do with sleep health. So the basic is to take such solution and bring it into the clinic in order to shorten procedure and reduce costs. The second stage is to move for home use, as I mentioned before. It will improve accessibility. It will save real estate. You won't need sleep clinic, technician time, and it will reduce cost. But this is only for diagnosis. The next step is by using it for multi-night. Because it's such a simple solution, you can start to use it for several nights. It will improve efficacy, but you can also use it as a routine test every day, every week, every month during a lifespan. So now we have a personalized medicine that we can test, not only diagnose our sleep, but also see what are the effects of drug, treatment, and so on. It's opened a new boundaries of sleep health. And the last stage, probably the most interesting one, is to identify biomarker patterns in our sleep from our brain that give us information was hidden until now, for example, for preventive care or for improved treatment. This product is available today for sleep research. Actually, there are more than 40 places that use it today. The next stage, once we have the FDA, we'll use it for clinical use, and next, we expand the clearance beyond diagnosis. Remember all the limits that we have today? Our solution is a seamless self-use solution. We can use it without technician, so we can use it for several nights for a routine test at the tenth of the current cost. And it's accessible for all of those that are neglected today from the current flow. And the most important part, we don't need to stay only in diagnosis. Sleep is a golden mine to understand our health, so we can go beyond diagnosis for treatment management and preventive care. We dream on a world that we can impact and improve lives of millions of women and men all over the world. But in order to do it, we first need to have a good sleep. Thank you.
In order to do it, we need a good sleep. What more can I say? What a fantastic way to end a session. Thank you so much for your great presentation. We have had people monitoring the chat throughout the last hour, collecting as many questions that we could, and our panelists have been kind enough to try to answer some of the questions that you had. But I also encourage all of you who listened in tonight to reach out to our speakers. You'll find their contact information on LinkedIn. If you have any questions in regards to the availability of the products, approval expected timelines, and other questions that you might have for any of the other speakers. So for me, it only remains to say, and I would like to take the opportunity to say thank you to all your speakers for their excellent contribution tonight. And I would also like to thank all the people working behind the scenes that you haven't seen, but without them, this event wouldn't have been possible. And special thanks goes out to Cecilia, Nama, Inval, Danit, and of course, Dennis, who helps us with all these sessions. And thanks to all of you for joining us online this afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are in the world, for being active in the chat, asking us questions and giving us feedback. That's highly, highly appreciated. I hope you really enjoyed this session as much as I did. So if you feel free to reach out again. And with that being said, I would like to thank all of you for joining. Leitraut, à bientôt, Wiedersehen, goodbye. Thank you so much and have a pleasant evening.